Today, what is really going on with Conor McGregor making his return to the octagon? What was he alluding to when he spoke with Ariel? Will he be coming back to fight? Have you seen Dana White's comments about it? With that being said, is there also a dastardly play going on between Dana White, the UFC, and Conor McGregor? Also, what about Ronda Rousey and her issues with concussions? Was this the real reason that she walked away from the sport? Or were the women in her weight class just too tough for her at that point in her career? Also, Jonathan Martinez didn't really know who Jose Aldo was when his manager offered him the fight. It took him a second. Plus a couple of other things. All of this and more on today's episode of Matter of Fact MMA. What's up? What's happening? Let's go. What's up, guys? We right back at it. Right back with you. It's your boy, Matt. We get ready to go over. I'm going to entitle this episode This Week in MMA. So, we're going to go over just a touch back on a few news topics that your boy already kind of spoke about. Just going to elaborate on it a little bit more and then also cover a couple of other things. Let's start out with, once again, the King of Snow, Conor McGregor. Now we've seen the interview. Conor McGregor goes on Ariel Helwani's show and multiple other shows, mainly to promote his new movie Roadhouse with Jake Gyllenhaal, which is on Prime Video. Go check it out. I haven't seen it yet, but I will be going to check it out. I'm not really worried about it. I'm not a tremendous Conor fan, but I just thought I'd say that. Maybe Conor will sponsor my podcast. I appreciate it. Nevertheless, so Conor goes on the MMA Hour with Ariel Helwani. Basically kind of talks about his movie, talks about making the movie. When Ariel tries to pin him down on if he's making a comeback to the octagon, he says that he is, but he didn't want to announce a date. But here's what was very interesting, is your boy Conor, he gets to talking, and as he's talking, he's talking about, he's kind of throwing shade at the current regime in the UFC, talking about Lorenzo Fertitta would have already locked him up with a new contract, had him ready for another 8 fights or so. You know what I'm saying? He was kind of taking shots at them, when Ariel was kind of asking him, basically kind of talking about whatever his contract situation might be. And Conor's like, yeah, I've got 2 more fights with them. And, I don't know what the holdup is. I don't know why they haven't made me any offers. When Ariel kind of pressed down on him as to why he thought they weren't making him offers, Conor was essentially like, what are they going to offer me? I think they're kind of scared to come at me and try to negotiate with me, because what are you going to offer me? You're going to have to offer me a ton of money, and it's got to be worth my while, because as he said, I'm Mr. B, talking about, he's close to a billionaire, you know what I'm saying? So what are you going to offer him? So, then there were comments that came out from Dana White after this interview, which is what as you see me checking my fizz on, is what I'm actually going to read to you all what Dana White said, because I think this is very interesting and kind of forms my opinion on the whole situation. This is coming from Uncle Dana. Dana says, Conor needed this time to take off and handle his obligations. And now, once this is over, he can get back into full-time training, which means from Thursday on, we can start talking about fights for Conor. Uncle Dana, who you trying to fool? Conor McGregor, who you trying to fool? In my opinion, in your boy, Matter of Fact MMA, Matt's opinion, what's really going on here could be more of a dastardly play, you know what I'm saying? More villainous than you are aware of. In my opinion, Conor has 2 fights left on his contract. Okay? Here's the deal. Out of all of these fights, going out and making their own way via boxing, via, podcasts, other things, and really get into the bag, you gotta be sitting there wondering, what about Conor? You know what I'm saying? What about Conor? Can Conor get to the bag? Now, let's just speak on this. Conor's already gotten to the bag of life, so he's already got plenty of money. So we're not saying it like he doesn't have plenty of money. But when you talk about Conor McGregor in the UFC, Conor has been underpaid his entire time he's been there. The majority of the money that Conor has made in his life has come from his fight with Floyd Mayweather and then Proper 12 and other business ventures, and now starring in Roadhouse with Jake Gyllenhaal. So, you know what I'm saying? With that being said, when you're talking about how much did you make fight purse wise or pay-per-view points wise in the UFC, he's made millions of dollars. But when you talk about him being the biggest star in the sport, he hasn't made the money that he should have made. With that being said, now homie's only got 2 fights left on his contract, right? Here's the reality. Conor's a company guy. I really think Conor likes the company. I don't know how he feels about the new regime now that Lorenzo Fertitta is not there anymore. I don't know how he feels about them. I don't know how he feels about Dana. I think overall, if you talk about mano a mano, man to man, Conor and Dana are good. I think they are cool. I think they are friends. When you're talking about business, I don't think they're friendly at all, right? With that being said, what you see here is a play where the UFC are really trying to nickel and dime Conor on his last 2 fights, okay? They don't want to just go out there and sign him versus Nate Diaz and get that fight out of the way. They didn't want to do him and Jorge Masvidal. You know, they don't want to just waste his last couple of fights, right? They do want them to be really large fights. And, of course, him versus Nate is huge. Him versus Jorge before Jorge fell off would have been huge. You know what I'm saying? Him fighting for a welterweight title would have been huge. Him versus Kobe would have been huge. Him versus Michael Chandler might not have been as big, but it would have been an action-packed fight. Him versus Justin Gaethje would be a huge fight. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of fights they can make with Conor. But the reality of it is Conor only has 2 fights left on his UFC contract. And like he said, he's Mr. B. You know what I'm talking about? The amount of money that they would have to offer Conor per fight in a renegotiation of his contract would be monumental. And the fact of the matter is, Conor's at a stage in his life where he's already so wealthy and, you know, he's so into his extracurricular activities and all of his other businesses. And now he's dibbling and dabbling in Hollywood. More on that later because it supports my point. It's like, bro, what are you going to offer this man that's going to be worthwhile? If the man's only going to come back and barely fight once a year or once every other year, you know what I'm saying? He's already in his 30s. What type of contract are you really going to be able to give the man as far as his per fight bonus? You know what I'm saying? Fight purse, I should say. You know what I'm saying? Like, it has to be worthwhile to the UFC. Yeah, when he returns to pay-per-view, it's going to be huge, but Conor hasn't won a fight in a long time. So his star power is dwindling. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, people will tune in for that very next fight when he makes his return. But what about after that? Especially if he goes out there and takes an L. Which you have to assume that he will. Because they're not going to waste him on somebody that he's going to go out there and wash. They're going to have him fight somebody that is going to be competitive. Because the UFC, if this person beats Conor, they want the rub to go toward this person and prop this person up. So that's a dilemma that you're looking at. And they definitely don't want him to get back down to 1 fight left. You know what I'm saying? So that's the issue, is Conor can go out there and fight multiple people. But the UFC is playing a game with him where I feel the UFC would much rather, they would like to have him fight. They would like to have him return to pay-per-view and boost up pay-per-view numbers. But they're making so much money from ESPN and other avenues and site fees off of where they go hold their cards, outside the Apex, wherever they go, they're getting site fees. They go to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is paying the ticket. They go to New York. New York is paying the ticket. Anytime they go to T-Mobile, they're paying a ticket. You know what I'm saying? Any place they travel to, they're getting paid site fees for this. Brazil, so on and so forth. So, with that being said, they're making money hand over fist. It might be more financially beneficial for them to keep Conor locked up in contract, keep stringing him along, and never really having him fight, because it keeps him locked down. Because without that lock of his contract, I don't ever see Conor ever going to fight for a PFL. You know what I'm saying? It's just not in the cards. I don't. It remains to be seen if PFL can get all the capital that they want to even pay Francis Ngannou's contract, let alone anybody else. You know what I'm saying? So I don't ever see him going there. I don't see another MMA corporation being able to lock him down. Conor's not going to go fight for no one championship. You know what I'm talking about? He ain't going over there. He ain't going to fight for no one. Chatri can rest easy at night knowing you ain't never going to sign Conor McGregor. Pretty much the same thing with PFL's Don Davis. Y'all can sleep easy because y'all ain't never going to lock down Conor. I think the real play, what Conor wants to do, is to go into boxing. I mean, he's the originator. He was the originator guy that left his company, went, fought Floyd Mayweather, made a ton of money, paid off Uncle Dana for allowing him to go do this fight, and move on. So with that being said, Conor's play is to go into boxing. Obviously to face Jake Paul. Obviously to face Logan Paul. Obviously to face Nate Diaz. In the trilogy ended in boxing. If he, on a light day, he could face, Jorge Masvidal. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of routes he could go. Or he keeps talking about this fight with Pacquiao. I think that might have lost its steam by now, but that's there. You know what I'm saying? If he wants to go in there and get the brakes beat off of him, he could talk about a fight with Canelo or anybody like that. But that's what I'm saying. There are tremendous fights out there for Conor in the boxing world. He can't do any of these where it's going to be worth his while he is locked down in a UFC contract. And I don't think he's going to be able to command the fight purse in boxing like when he went and fought Floyd, to where he can make enough money to pay off the UFC to allow him to go do this boxing fight and still make it worthwhile for what he's going to make from the fight. That's the issue. Doesn't matter what Dana's talking about. Doesn't matter about what Conor's talking about. The reality of it is, the UFC, and your boy Matt from Matter of Fact is telling y'all right now, so take this to the bank. Watch how this plays out, because this is the real play. Conor McGregor is worth more to the UFC not fighting and being locked down in a contract. Because literally, the UFC can trot him out there at any time to drum up ratings, to drum up intrigue in anything that they're doing. They can drum him out there for UFC 300. Oh, Conor's here, everyone. Conor's in the crowd. Let's interview Conor. They can keep acting like, oh, what if Conor returned to The Ultimate Fighter and did another season? They can continue to hype him up while he never fights. And it's almost like he would be a figurehead, the fighting figurehead for the UFC, who doesn't fight. But he could be that person for the UFC. He's more valuable to them in a way like that than he is if he was fighting. Because at this point, who knows if he'll ever win a fight in the UFC ever again. I can see him winning some fights possibly in boxing, depending on who his opponent is. But in the UFC, who's he going to fight that he's going to beat? Because they're not just going to throw him in there against an unknown guy, you know what I'm saying? So that's kind of where it stands. Because if he fights, yeah, his very next pay-per-view is going to do big numbers because it's his return. But once he goes out there and gets devastatingly washed by somebody, how's his last fight on his contract going to go? And who do you have him fight? Because if they're going to have him fight Nate, they have to lock down Nate into some sort of a 1 or 2 fight deal. And Nate is notoriously hard to negotiate with. So it's almost better just to keep him on ice and not let him play out these last two fights, because then he's going to leave us anyway and go box, because we can't pay him enough money to make it worth his while. So, in my opinion, that's where it stands with Conor McGregor. Let's shift gears. Let's move over to Rowdy Ronda Rousey. Rowdy Ronda Rousey, I believe, is making a run in the media circuit right now, because I believe she has a book out, or her book is already out. You know, if you're not aware, she has left WWE. She left WWE last year. And she's kind of like a free agent out in these streets. You know, I'm talking about Ronda Rousey out in these streets. You know, I'm talking about she for the streets. And here's the thing. She's making her rounds. But one interesting thing that did come out this week is she made her rounds, and she was talking about she had a lot of issues in her fighting career from concussions that were kind of lingering issues from all of her years in judo, you know. And she really talked about that, you know, she really had to hide a lot of her concussion issues that she was having while her career was going on in the UFC for fear that they wouldn't allow her to fight. I thought that was very interesting. I thought if Ronda is telling the truth about these concussion issues, I think it does explain a lot about her behavior midway and towards the end of her UFC career. Like early on in her UFC career, Ronda was extremely like a really happy person, very vibrant person. You know what I'm saying? She, you know, she was easy on the eyes. She was out there doing her thing. She's not so much easy on the eyes anymore because we wisened up. But at that time in MMA, compared to the other ones that you, compared to like Alexis Davis, shout out to Alexis Davis, but no disrespect, compared to like Sarah McMahon, you know what I'm saying? You know, a lot of the people in the female fighting space during that time, Ronda Rousey was a looker. You know what I'm talking about? So it's like, with that being said, it's like, bro, you know, but her behavior got very erratic towards halfway through and more towards the end of her UFC career, especially, you know, in the build up to the Holly Holmes fight. She really got really erratic in the weigh-in, was talking crazy to Holly Holmes, and she goes out there and gets devastatingly knocked out. You know what I'm talking about? It's like, she got really weird. She wouldn't do any media, do anything in the build-up to the fight against Amanda Nunes. Lord knows Amanda Nunes took brain cells from her, took years off of her life with that beating that she took. So I could definitely see, if she's not making this up, I could see a world where she did have a lot of issues with concussions and with, you know, just battling the fatigue from that. You know, a lot of fighters, that's really put them out of the sport early. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know. I could definitely see that being an issue with Ronda, because it just seemed like her behavior got so erratic. And when I remember when she lost to Holly, you know, it wasn't a show that I watched, but I remember getting on Instagram and seeing these clips make the rounds of her, like, I guess on like Ellen's show, like Ellen DeGeneres or whatever her name was, and she was like on her show, and she was crying, and she was talking about after she lost the fight, she felt like she wasn't going to have fans anymore, and people weren't going to like her, and people weren't going to respect her. And I'm sitting there watching, I'm like, why are you crying? Like, why are you so emotional and so upset? Like, you're Ronda Rousey. Like, dust yourself off and get back in the game, you know what I'm saying? But, you know, concussions and a lot of concussions, multiple concussions, concussion issues, CTE, you know, anything lingering, anything related to CTE, you have a lot of issues with depression, sadness. It's hard to control your emotions. So it could be possible all this was going on with Ronda, or she could be saying this to sell her book. So, you know what I'm saying? There's a world where Ronda's going out there and selling fool's gold and trying to sell her book, which I will not be purchasing or reading. But nevertheless, I don't know. That was just something that was kind of making its rounds in the news this week. Let's move on. How about Jonathan Martinez made some comments about his coach or his manager hitting him up while he was training, or he just finished training, or he was about to train, one of those three. And Basically, homie was like, whoever hit him up was like, we got it lined up and set up. We got Jose Aldo for you. He's like, who? They're like, probably if they were with him in person, they would have gave him that look like. If they wasn't in person, they was probably making that face on the phone. And they were like, what are you talking about? I'm talking about Jose Aldo. And he's like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll take that fight. Jonathan Martinez, I'm going to need for you when you're a professional fighter and somebody calls you and says you're going to, what do you think about fighting Jose Aldo? What do you think? I'm going to need for you to know who Jose Aldo is. Not like he really didn't really know, but I'm going to need for you to connect the dots. There's only one Jose Aldo in the sport, you know what I'm talking about? And if there's another Jose Aldo, we ain't worried about him. He needs to, step your fight game up because we ain't worried about you. There's one Jose Aldo. There's one King of Rio. And when they call you and they tell you you're going to be fighting Jose Aldo, you need to know which one it is. Shout out to Jonathan Martinez. Can't wait to see him step in the octagon with Jose Aldo. Hope he takes an L because I'm a Jose fan. Nevertheless, let's move on from there. We already discussed early in the week about Francis Ngannou's comments with Anthony Joshua, though that's still kind of making the rounds. Not a whole lot new there. PFL's Don Davis still believes that Francis Ngannou is going to fight for the PFL. He believes it's going to happen later this year in September. I'll believe it when I see it. I don't think Francis sets foot in the smart cage at all in 2024. I believe his next pivot is probably going to be a boxing match later on, late this year. Depending on what happens in the fight between Usyk and Tyson Fury, it could be in a rematch in December in Saudi Arabia against Tyson Fury. We'll see how all that plays out. That's pretty much it. That's what we're going to discuss. That's what it is for this week in MMA. You know what I'm saying? We are cruising on along. The UFC Apex 89 goes down tomorrow in the main event. Amanda Ribas steps in the octagon with Rose Namajunas, Thug Rose. So that's what's going down tomorrow. Nevertheless, please like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you thought about this week in MMA. And I appreciate you guys for joining me for another episode of Matter of Fact MMA. And I'll check you next time. Peace.